Hello, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. So we will start our webinar now, and we will cover diet and nutrition Ayurveda through two webinars. And in our course syllabus, we have mentioned food items first and the concepts later, but I realized that it would be more effective if we discuss the concepts first and then went into the properties of specific food items. So today we will be dealing with concepts of food and nutrition dietetics in Ayurveda. So food is called in Ayurveda as ahara. Ahara means something which is consumed by living beings spontaneously. Living beings are drawn to food around them by instinct. So food is something which we eat more by instinct than by informed decision making. So there is a need. In animals, this instinct is well regulated, but in humans, this instinct is not so well regulated. So we need to also combine informed decision making with that instinctual urge, and that is what Ayurvedic diet is all about. So it means taking food after proper qualitative and quantitative assessment. So according to Charaka, who is one of the uh, composers of a very important textbook in Ayurveda, there are 8 factors that are to be taken into consideration to decide a diet. I'm sorry, there is a small problem with the slides. I'll just correct it in a moment. Yes. So one is the nature of the substance, or this is called, hello, can you all hear me? Okay, somebody just mentioned that the voice is not clear. Okay, so we continue. There are 8 factors that we need to consider when we want to decide upon a diet. And these 8 factors are: one is nature of the substance. Nature of the substance means each food article has certain properties. They are heavy or light, hot or cold, unctuous or dry. And so the nutritional property of a particular food item is decided on the basis of its inherent properties. If you look at modern science of nutrition, we would say that these are carbohydrates, these are proteins, these are fats, these are vitamins. Each of them have specific properties. Carbohydrates are fairly easily digested, so we can also compare, as we will do later, the Ayurvedic assessment of food properties can also be compared with principles of modern nutrition. But at this point of time, I'm only going to discuss the Ayurvedic aspects. So what we mean by heaviness, lightness, these are all related to the way the food is digested and metabolized and how it affects catabolism and anabolism in the body. At this point, it's just important to realize that individual properties of food substances is a very important factor which helps us to decide which food to pick up to eat and which one not to eat, depending on the season, depending on your digestion, depending on constitution and all that. And the second part is processing. This is a very important principle. So by processing foods, its properties can completely change for good or for bad. So something which is good can become bad because of processing, like for example oil. Oil, if you keep heating it, then the trans fats are created and it becomes harmful. When it is not processed, then it's better. But some foods, they are bad when you eat raw, but they become good when you cook it, and vice versa. So processing plays a very important role. Yes, yes. So what do you mean by personal system? So something which is very difficult to digest can be processed and made more easily digestible. So this is a very important aspect in creating diet, how you process the food substances. First, you understand its inherent natural properties. And the second is how do we process them so that their properties change. And third is combination. When you combine substances, again, you can produce good or bad effects. So when two things are combined, the individual qualities will be altered and a new property is formed. So when honey and ghee, which are generally good for health, but if you combine them together in equal quantities, they are supposed to be not good. Whereas turmeric and pepper, when we combine them, then their efficacy becomes enhanced. So the third important principle is combining. So already you can think when you plan a diet in Ayurveda, the first step is study each food that you are taking. What is its property in its raw form? Then you have to understand what will happen when you process it. The third thing is what will happen when you combine it with other substances. So these are three important principles on the basis of which we assess the nutritional properties of food substances. The fourth point is the quantity of the substance. So the assessment of the quantity of the food which is consumed, and it can be done in two ways. There are going to be some Sanskrit terms. Yes, that is what we mean by constitution. So each individual person has a different constitution. And according to the constitution, you have to choose the food, choose the processing, and also choose what combinations you will use. And Rashi, quantity of the substance is, decided also. Quantity of the total food and individual articles. What is the total amount of food that a person has to eat? And what is the amount of each substance that a person has to eat? So this is called as the quantity of the substance. So this is also very well laid out, how much quantity of each item a person should eat. And then we have the place of origin. So depending on the place where you live, so the diet that is suitable in India itself, in different places we have different diets. You cannot follow the same diet all over the country. So depending on your geographical location, you have to choose a particular type of diet. So this is the fifth principle in deciding, a diet. So we know that different countries in different regions have specific diets. In India, every state has different diets, and Kerala is one state where Ayurveda is very popular. And here we have different diets even across different parts of the state. So this is a very important principle. So for example, if you look at the place, in the tropical parts of India, there's use of more spices because digestion is weak, whereas in the northern parts of India where the weather gets more colder, more heavier substances are used, oil and sweets are used more. And in cold countries like Europe, there is more use of meat, alcohol, whereas in India, in the tropical parts, southern regions, it's not advisable to drink so much of alcohol. So this is the place. And then we already discussed about the time or seasons. Your food and diet habits have to change according to the seasons. So one is, according to the seasonal variations, you have to avoid hot and pungent food in hot climate. And then according to your personal condition also, you may have to make changes. What is good in the morning may not be good in the night. According to Ayurveda, yogurt should not be consumed at night, but it can be consumed during the daytime. So very specific guidelines have been created according to the influence of the time and the season. Next is the rules, how to consume food. Very elaborate guidelines are given. When should we eat food? Should it be, according to specific timings, breakfast 8 o'clock, lunch? But Ayurveda advises that we should actually eat food only when your system is actually ready for it. So not exactly to the clock, although it's also good to make your diet regular. You should have some regularity and also some flexibility. For example, Ayurveda says that if your food is not digested properly, then you should not take the next meal. Proper signs of digestion and excretion, especially in the morning, until your bowels are moved, you're not advised to take food. And even when you eat, there are some rules, even the posture, how you must sit, and what foods should be eaten in what sequence. All these things are very elaborately described in Ayurveda. And in our next class and the next webinar, we would also be, discussing some of these points. So this is about the rules for taking food. And then we have the person who consumes the food. So this is where we talk about, the constitution, hello, can you all hear me? At least one of you seem to be having a problem. So Syed seems to be having a problem. So maybe he should try to refresh the page. So it's just one person's problem. So maybe you should try to refresh your page. See, all the others seem to be able to hear. Okay, so the person, see, a lot of people have allergies, a lot of people have habituations to certain types of diet. So all these things play a very important role uh, in deciding what a person should consume. So these 8 principles are very comprehensive. These are this is the framework in which Ayurveda advises how you can create a diet customized for each person. So it is there is a systematic pattern, and at the same time it's also flexible. So to summarize again, the first point is that you must study the properties of the food substance you are taking. So from a modern point of view, we would check whether if the food is it a carbohydrate, or is it protein, or is it or whether it is vitamins, and how will the food get digested, metabolized, what are the good and bad effects that the food can create on your system, and then you see how you can process it and modify the properties of the food. So you need to study and understand what are the recommended ways of processing food and what are the ways of processing which are not recommended. So then we have to also understand what other food items with which can we combine it and which ones we shouldn't combine it. And then we have to decide what quantity of the food, the total food, or total meal, what quantity we should consume, and what should be the quantity of each individual constituent of a diet, and how it can be made suitable to the place, to the season, and then what are the rules that you have to follow. And finally, we have to also decide whether this is, fitting into the needs of that particular individual. So these are the 8 factors for deciding a balanced diet. Is this clear? So this is one part of our discussion. If you have any questions, you can ask, because these are the 8 important principles on the basis of which Ayurveda advises, food. Any questions? Yeah, I just want to wait a moment. Any questions? Because we are going to the next part, which would be before which I would like to find out if there are any. So I guess there are no questions, so then we can move on to the next point. Are you all able to hear me? Okay. Okay, fine. So that's fine. So the next point that we are going to discuss are the concepts. You know how Ayurveda evaluates and assesses food. The concept guru and lakhu. Guru means heaviness of the food, and lakhu means lightness. So these are actually related to the way the body would digest and metabolize the food. So food which is, when we say in Ayurveda that the food is heavy, it can mean 2 things. One is that the food takes longer to digest. I mean, the aliment has to take more effort to digest it. If lakhu means it's digested much easily. So in modern terms, we can say that foods which are guru usually have a low glycemic index. I hope all of you are aware of glycemic index. Are you aware of glycemic index? Yes. So what Ayurveda says, so this is a question of language. I mean, in Ayurveda, we have used certain other metaphors and language, but we can translate that also into modern understanding. So I'm just going to give some examples. What Ayurveda considers as heavy food has a low glycemic index. So we say wheat, it has a lower glycemic index. Rice is lakhu or light, which means it has a high glycemic index. Which means if you take a light food, then the glucose levels in the blood will rise very sharply, very quickly. If you take foods which are very light, then, I mean heavy, then the sugar levels in the blood will increase very slowly. So it's really very crucial to understand as we know today, especially when diabetes is becoming a big menace, it's very important to understand food in terms of guru and lakhu. The second thing is guru and lakhu is also understood in terms of calorie. So high calorie foods are called as guru, and low calorie lakhu or light is actually low in calories. So is this point clear? So we are dividing foods into guru and lakhu. These are Sanskrit terms. Guru means heavy and lakhu means light. And if you look at modern concepts, we can understand that they mean two things. Guru means foods which have low glycemic index, and lakhu means foods which have high glycemic index. But on the other hand, they also mean foods which are high in calories and foods which are low in calories. So a food which is high in calories need not necessarily always have a high glycemic index or a low glycemic index. So they can come in all combinations. So we have to assess foods from this viewpoint before deciding what to take and what not to take. And in Ayurveda, all the common food items and articles have actually been assessed in terms of these properties. So if you have any doubt, you can clarify. This is all very important concepts when we go to study individual food items. It's very important that we have a clear grasp of these concepts. And I'm using a few Sanskrit terms because just giving a translation wouldn't be good. In fact, if you want to study Ayurveda, there is some essential vocabulary that you need to know. If you study any technical science, you can translate most of it, but at least 20% you need to be familiar with technical terms. So in this lesson onwards, I'm introducing a few Sanskrit terms which are indispensable, which you cannot avoid. If you're learning modern medicine, then you will have to learn some technical terms. So is that okay? Are you finding the Sanskrit terms difficult? Okay, thank you. So what we say is that the quantity of the food, we have to decide So heavy food should be used only up to 1/3 of our capacity. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the feedback. So that makes it comfortable for me to continue. And light foods you can take up to half of the capacity. And even up to the point that the stomach is almost filled. That is if you are healthy normally, and if you are processing and combining these foods in the proper way. So these are some general principles. So according to their qualities, the light articles of food, they stimulate appetite. Even when they are taken in excess amounts, they may not cause indigestion. But the only problem that you have to be wary of is that light foods have high glycemic index. So if you take them in very large quantities, then you will have a sugar load in your system. So although they are not harmful in terms of being digested, because they get easily digested and easily absorbed, if you eat too much quantity of light food, then they can create problems, especially with diabetes. So then, so the heavy foods are suppressors of appetite, and you cannot take too much of them. And you need to also be exercising quite well when you take heavy foods. You must have a strong digestion. But the only thing is heavy foods which are less in calories. So in Ayurveda, we recommend heavy foods with less calories for diabetes. So those kind of foods we can take in when you don't want the body to put on weight and you don't want the blood glucose levels to increase all of a sudden. And light foods with low calories can also be recommended for diabetes. But heavy foods with high calories are not recommended, not only for diabetics, but also generally for anybody. And light food with high calories is very dangerous for diabetes. So this is the way food is classified. So you can generally classify foods into these 4 categories: heavy foods with less calories, light foods with less calories, heavy foods with high calories, and light food with high calories. So the first 2 are generally more frequently usable, and the next 2 are less usable. Unfortunately, most of the junk food that we are used to today fall under the 2nd and 3rd categories. And that is why they are very harmful. So Ayurveda gives you some principles on the basis of which you can make assessment of the food that you eat and then decide how it will affect your system. So in Ayurveda, all the 8 factors we need to consider equally. So not only do we have to decide what food is to be taken, the most important principle is that the foods that we consume should get completely transformed. And in order for it to get completely transformed, the timing of taking the food, the quantity, and then the suitability for the individual and the constitution, all these factors play a role. So there are 4 practices. What type of diet you are eating. So this is called as samashana, or this is the best practice, is balanced eating habit. It's called as samashana. Please don't worry if you're not able to pronounce Samashana. Is the best practice. It's balanced eating practice, which means when you have following a diet practice, eating food in the proper quantity at the proper time, and only after the previous digestion of the food that you have already consumed, then this method of eating is called as samashana. This is the best practice. Adhyashana means frequent eating. I hope you remember in our previous webinar, we discussed new studies have shown that two heavy meals in a day is better than eating the same quantity of food several times during the day. Eating several times during the day is considered as a faulty method of eating. This is called as frequent eating in Ayurveda. And this frequent eating is considered to be harmful for the body. It's a faulty method of eating. The next one is Vishamashana. So your diet habit may be wrong in terms of the frequency of your meals or in terms of the timing. When your timing is disturbed, then it is called as Vishamashana, wrong timings. So you have a late breakfast or too early lunch or late lunch, or you skip meals. This is called as wrong timings, and this is called as Vishamashana. This is another method of faulty eating. And then Amatrashana is, taking food in improper quantities. You take more rice, less vegetables, or too much of rice, less vegetables. Your protein to carbohydrate ratio is not balanced, or your fat to carbohydrate to protein ratio is not balanced. This is called as Amatrashana. So all these four methods, these are the four common methods of eating, three of which are faulty. So maybe a question at this time, you can look at your own dietary habits, and can you tell if any one of you, which of the four methods of eating would you be following generally? How many are following the Samashana method? Yes. So this is what Ayurveda says is one of the biggest challenges of modern lifestyle. Okay, yeah, once in a while is okay. Well, I'm only talking about almost always. It's not possible maybe to do this every day. I wouldn't say, but once in a while, because of the pressures from our work and other things, we may have to deviate. But what I'm asking is almost always. Is there anybody in this group who is, sorry for asking personal questions, but if you find it uncomfortable, you don't have to answer. But I'm just trying to see if you can relate these concepts with your own life. So that is the reason why I'm asking questions. So are there people who are, doing what you would call as adhyashana, that is very frequent meals? Okay, so right, so that's a good thing. And there are some people who are not able to keep timing, they delay their meals, and then they develop acidity, that's called Vishamashana. And then if you're not careful about bringing variety in your diet, in our next webinar, in this webinar, we are talking about conceptual aspects of a balanced diet. In the next webinar, we will see how to balance diet in terms of food items. Like over the period of a year, we have to make sure that we take enough of different types of food articles. Unless all types of food articles you use in the sufficient quantity, your nutritional requirements cannot be met. So that is amatrashana, or having food in improper quantities. So you can try straight away to translate some of these concepts in your own practice. You can assess your own food habits and also food habits of your clients in terms of this framework. And also the 8 factors that I talked about, they're clinically very, very necessary. So let me ask, does anybody in this group change diet according to seasons? Yes, okay. Right. So this is where you can try, experiment with some Ayurvedic principles, looking at the seasons and your own constitution. You can begin to see if changing or adjusting your diet can give some better outcomes. So there are some experiments that you could do after the webinar. So in the next webinar, I will, because we will be completing the preventive medicine aspect with the next webinar. And so at the end of the next webinar, I would like to give you some experiments and, what you can say, hands-on, some assignments which you could try to do, which will enable you to relate to these concepts, not just the diet part, but the entire thing that we discussed so far, which includes, can you assess your own constitution? Can you assess changes in the seasons in your own place? And what kind of diet would you plan for yourself? So these kind of simple, workbook assignments, which if you do at the end of our next webinar, then it would be enabling you to relate to these concepts in a more concrete manner. So we will plan for that at the end of the next webinar. So now there's a very important concept in Ayurveda, that is the concept of incompatible food. In modern medicine or modern nutrition, the focus is entirely almost on nutritional properties of the substances. It's not that the other factors are not emphasized, but there's an overemphasis on the nutritional properties. You look at whether it's carbohydrate or what type of carbohydrate, what type of protein, what is the calories and the vitamins, but there's very inadequate discussion on customizing the food according to the person, according to the individual, how to process foods in a more wholesome manner. These things are not so adequately discussed. Whereas in Ayurveda, there is this concept of incompatibility. Even good foods, if you consume them in wrong combinations, then they become harmful to the body, tissues, and elements. So these are called as incompatible foods. So incompatible foods, they are regarded as slow toxins. They eventually pose stress to the system. They are triggers for autoimmune disease. Are you aware of autoimmune diseases? So, Ayurveda says that if you habitually eat incompatible food, then you will get autoimmune disease. And this is because incompatible foods throws challenges to your immune system. And the immune system overreacts, and then it creates autoimmune disease. So according to Ayurveda, modern diet habits have a role to play in the prevalence of autoimmune diseases. So anybody here who is not aware of what is autoimmune disease? Autoimmune disease means diseases that are the outcome of a deranged immune system. The body is attacking itself. So the body attacks the body's own structures and components as if they were alien. And these are triggered by certain factors which are not yet fully understood in modern medicine and science. Whereas in Ayurveda, we trace this almost invariably to the concept of incompatibility. Is this concept clear? So we will now look at 18 types of incompatibility. So one is, if you eat food which is not suitable for the place which you are living, this is called as desha viruddha, or this is food that is incompatible with the place that you are living. This is a big problem today in modern life. All types of foods are available everywhere. While it is all right to occasionally take such foods, if you are regularly eating foods that are suitable for different places, like if in India we begin to eat American food, yes, it is true. Amatrashana, ratios, and also combination, exactly. Plus, it's not just the combining of the foods, even choosing the right type of food. So as I was telling, the desha, the place. American food is not suitable in India. While you can have it for a change once in a while, if you regularly shift to an American diet while you are in India, then it becomes incompatible. Your system is not able to handle it, not able to completely digest, assimilate, and metabolize. And then it will put a stress on your immune system. And this will become the basis for creating diseases in the long run. So similarly, if we try to impose, this is a big danger that people are doing. People think that Ayurvedic diet means Indian food. It's not true. Indian food, there is nothing called Indian food, because even in India, in different parts of the country, people eat different, have different diets. So there is nothing like, if you just cook rice and wheat, it doesn't mean that you're following Ayurvedic diet. Ayurvedic diet is when you have created a diet which is based on these principles. So if you are in Europe, or you're in the US, or in Africa, or in Russia, or in Australia, or in Japan, then you have to look at the conditions, the parameters which you will influence your physiology because of your living in that particular place, and then you have to choose the right kind of food. So that is desha viruddha, or which is dependent on the area in which you are living. And then we have kala viruddha, which is time. So if you take a food that is not suitable for that particular season, even though the food is very nutritive, this is a very important thing. In modern nutrition, the nutritiveness of that food is overemphasized. So you say, this fruit is very good, it's got a lot of antioxidants, or this blah 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 chemical constituents, and if you start overeating it, then we say it becomes incompatible because it may not be suitable for that particular season. So in winter, certain foods can trigger some diseases. In summer, certain foods can trigger some diseases. Yogurt, for example, we do not recommend it in hot weather. So these are some, this is the second type of incompatibility, which is called as time dependent or kala viruddha. Yogurt, according to Ayurveda, it's not really cooling. It pacifies vata and and aggravates pitta a bit, and also kapha. If you take it in very hot seasons, on the other hand, buttermilk is cooling. It is a summer drink in India. So yogurt is not so harmful if it is not sour. When yogurt becomes sour, it becomes hot in potency. So especially sour yogurt cannot be eaten in the hot season. But the yogurt that we get in Europe and other countries are generally not getting so sour because of the weather. In India, if you keep yogurt, it easily becomes sour. And then it becomes hot, and then it can provoke inflammation. So then the third thing is digestive power. Is this point clear? Any questions about yogurt? Okay. So the third thing is depending on the digestive power. This is called as Agni Viruddha. Consuming food without assessing. So to conclude about yogurt, if the yogurt is not sour, then its properties are different. That's why in Ayurveda we say that properties of a substance should be assessed very, very carefully. Sour yogurt and sweet yogurt are very, very different. So, and if you process it with certain other food items, then you can overcome some of its negative effects. So all these things are very crucial. The third thing is depending on the digestive power. So consuming food without assessing the digestive power. So that is considered as incompatibility in terms of your digestive power. So each person should decide what to eat depending on his or her own digestive capacity, which might change during different times of the day. So in the evening, many foods are to be avoided because evening is a time when your digestion is not really very strong. Then the fourth thing is dose-dependent incompatibility. Certain substances, when you combine in particular quantities, may give toxic effects. For example, ghee and honey in equal quantities are not advised in Ayurveda. Similarly, milk and fish, these are not considered to be compatible. So this is dose dependent. When you combine turmeric and pepper, you must use more turmeric and less pepper. So each combination of food, these proportions, you have to be very careful about how you balance the proportions. Otherwise, there can be incompatibility. So you can see there's already a mouthful to consider on balanced diet in Ayurveda, and there are still 14 more factors which we will discuss. So there is another important thing. Apart from constitution, people get used to certain foods. Some people are eating yogurt so regularly. Okay, so in what we generally give is 5 grams of turmeric powder with 1 gram of pepper powder. So usually when we take turmeric and pepper, it's actually mixed either with honey or with gooseberry juice. Are you aware? Is everybody aware of gooseberry? It is called as amalaki in Sanskrit. Do you know amalaki? I don't know whether it's available in the other parts of the world. In India, it is a very important rejuvenative fruit, and there are recent studies which have shown that this is able to repair, prevent even DNA damage. Okay, so here we get the fresh fruits. So we also mix. So this is especially also good for diabetes. Okay, so that is about the food combinations. Then there's something called as habits, dependent on habits, taking opposite, substances which are certain people are used to certain food substances. So your body gets accustomed or acclimatized, and if you suddenly change those habits, then it creates incompatibility. So in Ayurveda, we say if you have a bad diet habit, you should not change all of a sudden. So people who are regularly using so sweet and cold articles, if you suddenly change your diet, then it can cause a wrong response from the body. So it's also very important that when you go to another place, another country, you cannot all of a sudden change your diet habit. It can have harmful effects on your system. And then depending on the doshas. So in certain diseases, particular doshas may be imbalanced in your system, and you have to use foods and drugs which are not going to further aggravate those doshas. So if you take a vata aggravating food and you have vata, you are a vata prakriti person, a vata constitution person, or if you have a disease in which vata is increased, and if you take that food, then this becomes incompatible with respect to the dosha. So this is another factor which makes food incompatible. This is, I'm emphasizing these concepts because these are ideas which are very unique to Ayurveda, which are not seen in modern principles of nutrition. Then comes the processing. Foods becoming incompatible because of the methods of processing. So using certain metals, using certain vessels, frying oil too much or reheating the oil that you've already used. These are all procedures which actually make the food incompatible. So it's well known that deep frying and also recooking the oil that you have already used, and then storing food for a long time, adding preservatives, these are all other factors which can contribute to unwanted effects from the food. And then comes the potency. We should not mix drugs or food items which have totally opposite potencies. So today we are taking cold coffee, which according to Ayurveda is not really so good. Cold coffee is not considered generally good, and we have also seen that especially when people are sick and have allergies, cold coffees can trigger. A hot coffee has an entirely different property. So this is potency based incompatibility. And then we have foods becoming incompatible based on the condition of your gastrointestinal tract. So for some people, even milk can cause diarrhea. So people who have lactose intolerance. For some people, spicy food can create a lot of acidity and difficulties. So these are all because of the incompatibility with the gastrointestinal tract. So this is very important in diagnosis and assessment of a patient. We need to understand these factors in order to give the most suitable diet for an individual. We must also be able to understand if a particular person is facing difficulties with diet. You must be able to understand whether it is related to incompatibility, and if it is incompatibility, then what type of incompatibility it is. Similarly, depending on the condition. So certain foods can also cause loose bowels and laxation. And if a person is very exhausted and weak, then these food items can aggravate the condition further. Diets can itself bring about changes in electrolyte balance and also glucose levels. So if the food is not suitable for that particular condition of that person, then it is called avastha viruddha. This is the Sanskrit term. So we have covered about 10 types of incompatibility. Do you have any questions? Is it all clear? We have 8 more to discuss in this before we have a break. So I just want to make sure that we are not getting lost. So we discussed 8 factors for a balanced diet, and then we discussed 4 types of diet practices: samashana and vishamashana, matrashana, and adhyashana. And now we are discussing incompatibilities, and we have covered 10 types of incompatibility. So before we go on to the next 8, I just wanted to reconfirm that everybody is able to follow. If there are any questions, we can take at this point. Otherwise, I will continue. Okay, so we continue. So then there is what is called as krama viruddha. So we should follow also certain behavioral patterns to ensure that the food that we take is fully digested. So you should not eat when you have an urge to void your bowels or your bladder. So when you want to, void your feces or urine, you have to first attend to that and then only consume food. Otherwise, it interfere with your digestion. Or else, there can also be problems like if you eat and then heavily exercise, or immediately after eating you're not supposed to take bath. So even if you take the best food, the most balanced diet, if you do some harmful behavior after eating, can be dangerous. And then comes certain practices. Uh, if you eat pork or wheat, you shouldn't immediately drink hot water. So if you eat, for every diet, there are some balancing counter diets. Like for example, if you eat a lot of ghee, then you can take buttermilk. Buttermilk will balance it. You can also take hot water after ghee. Ghee goes well with hot water. So after food, what drinks you take should be balancing. Like cold water after taking ghee is not good. With curds, if you have taken a meal with a lot of curds or yogurt, then hot water is not advised. So these are important, concepts of taking foods counter diets which are balancing to the main diet that you consume. So you can imagine already that there are so many factors which decide how our diet becomes balanced. And Ayurveda has opened up all those factors which we may not normally consider when deciding a balanced diet. Modern concept of just calories and BMI is only one aspect of the whole story. So these two things are very similar, the Upachara Viruddha and then the Parihara Viruddha. Parihara means compensatory and Upachara means supplementary. There's only a or desserts after a full meal, yes. So we are talking as compensatory and supplementary. Two things, item 12 and 13. I'll try to explain the difference between the two. Compensatory means that when you overeat something, like if you overeat ghee, then you need to compensate it. You need to prevent it from creating unnecessary sensations in your body. So a compensatory measure is buttermilk. So when you eat ghee, it's not necessary to drink buttermilk always. You need to drink buttermilk only if you feel that you have taken more of the ghee. And in order to facilitate the digestion of ghee, you have to take hot water. This is only for digestion. It's not for compensating. So whether you have taken more of ghee or less of ghee, you have to drink hot water after you have taken ghee, but not cold water. So this is the difference between compensatory and supplementary food items. So if you take after ghee, if you take yogurt instead of buttermilk, then it is a wrong compensation. If you drink cold water after taking ghee, then it's wrong supplementation. I hope this difference is clear. Is this clear? So please let me know what more you want to know. Where is the doubt? See, if you take more of a food item, means if you overdose, then you can take another food which will compensate. Is this clear? Which means if you overeat, if you overeat or overdose ghee, then you can take buttermilk and it will balance that overdose. But if you have taken proper dose, then there is no need. Compensation is not mandatory, is needed only in case of overdose. Supplementation is mandatory. When you take ghee, hot water is mandatory. This is supplementation. If you overdose ghee, then you have to take buttermilk. This is not mandatory, this is conditional. Is this clear now? Better is not enough. We need to clearly understand. So, anybody else finding difficulty between compensation and supplementation? Is it clear to everyone? Okay. Anyway, I'll explain the concepts that when we eat foods, it's very difficult to decide the exact quantity. It becomes difficult to decide the exact quantity. So we may sometimes take more than is necessary. So when we take a little more than what is necessary, then we can counteract the effects by compensation. But even when we eat normal amounts of a particular food, it becomes necessary to take some other substances also to ensure that it is properly digested. Hot water is necessary for ghee to be completely and easily digested and processed by the system. So that supplementation is very important. So it's very, very crucial that you take substances, the right kind of substances for compensation and supplementation. Otherwise, they can also create incompatibility. Okay. So next is the cooking. So wrong procedures in cooking. So undercooking or overcooking. Certain substances should not be cooked much. If you overcook it, then, so for example, garlic should be crushed before being taken, but it should not be kept just before cooking. Should not be overcooked because the active ingredient will get converted to another chemical. If you, for example, crush and keep the garlic for long, or even if you don't crush it while cooking, then it is not of use. So these kind of points are really very important to ensure that you get the full nutritional benefit of a particular food item. And then comes the combination. This we already discussed, that milk and sour substances cannot be combined together they create difficulties. And then this is a very important thing, point number 16. Even you cannot go just on the principles of nutrition alone. Certain individuals, the food that you take should be mentally acceptable to a person. So some foods are not, even though they may be very nutritious, some people cannot accept it. Their mind cannot accept it. So such foods should not be forced on any individual in the name of just nutritional value. So this is important in Ayurveda, that even the personal, mental state of that individual is taken into consideration. So this is dependent on the mind or the heart of the individual. And then there are two more. So we must also use substances in the right stage of maturity, like unripe fruits and overripe fruits. These can be problematic. So inadequately ripened or overripened fruits can create problems. So they will possess opposite properties. Is this point clear? So for example, unripe grapes which are sour can cause acidity, whereas fully ripened sweet grapes can pacify acidity. So these are very important points to be considered when eating food articles. And then finally we have procedural incompatibility, violating restrictions imposed. One should not eat alone, one should not laugh or speak while eating. If you do that, that can also interfere with proper digestion. And so these are 18 types of incompatibility that make your food incompatible and not nutritious. So you can choose a diet based on modern principles of nutrition. You can look at its calories, you can look at its nutritional constituents, but if you don't consider what we have discussed just now, just to summarize, are 8 factors, and then the 4 methods of eating, and 18 incompatibilities. So these are important principles in a balanced diet. These are unique contributions of Ayurveda. And I think that these can be applied in modern society, in modern life, and we can make our diets more balanced, and there will be less allergic diseases, less skin diseases, and definitely less autoimmune diseases. And Ayurveda says that these changes to the diet can also be very much preventive of cancer. So there are a few more slides before we take the break. So at this point I would like to ask you, were you able to comprehend these 30 points that I mentioned today, 8 factors, 4 methods of eating, and 18 incompatibilities? Does this make sense? Yes, it does. So in our next class, we will also discuss about different types of food, and some which needs to be chewed, some which needs to be swallowed, some which needs to be licked, some which needs to be mixed more with saliva. So all these things are very elaborately discussed in the Ayurvedic texts. So these are the general principles of dietetics in Ayurveda. And Ayurveda says that unless we consider these points, your diet can never become completely balanced. So now let us come on to the conclusion that according to Ayurveda, diet is one of the most important components in preserving the body. So we say that diet itself should be considered as medicine, and if we are able to take these principles into consideration, then we are able to achieve a disease-free life and also long life. So diet enables us to prevent disease, medicine to cure. Diet also helps to cure to some extent, but it's got a tremendous role in preventing disease, in keeping, and also enhances longevity. So these two important outcomes come from diet if you follow these principles. So I'm just putting a little bit of Sanskrit behind. But what Ayurveda says is that if these 30 principles that we discussed today is really the basis of wholesome and unwholesome food. And we have to take a lot of effort to ensure that we are following these principles, and then it will be very easy to preserve, health and prevent disease. So here's another important concept which we will discuss, that Ayurveda believes that food affects your mind. So we will come back to this point again after the break, but I want to just give an introduction. This is again a new concept in Ayurveda, which is not so much discussed in modern science, but there's a connection between the food and the mind. Are you aware of this? So we say that you have to choose your food in such a way that it also affects your mind. So it's not enough. Some foods, even though they may be nutritious, they are actually not recommended because they can have a negative impact on your mind. So we say there are 3 types of food. The sattvic food, which is fresh and pure diet, which nourishes the body, keeps the mind peaceful, and it creates a balanced flow of energy between the mind and the body. So some types of food we do not advise long-term use. So garlic is one food which we would not recommend for long-term use, because this can cause irritation and stimulation of the mind. So many foods like alcohol, for example, is considered as not a sattvic food. So long-term use of alcohol can have, we all know that, can have also a negative effect on the mind. Meat, long-term and frequent use is not recommended. So these are not sattvic foods. Generally vegetables, milk, and rice, these are considered to be very sattvic foods. Then we have what we call as rajasic food, very spicy, stimulating food, deeply fried, and these can have a long-term use of these types of foods they can promote stress, they overstimulate the body and mind, and this is called rajasic. So most of the fast food that we eat today, fast food and junk food, come under the rajasic category. So these are meant, deep fry, because of the agni or fire. So because of the extremely increased contact with fire, this can cause inflammation and irritation in the body. So that is why they are considered as rajasic. Many of them are both rajasic and tamasic. For example, alcohol. Alcohol in very small quantities is sattvic. Alcohol in moderate, in high doses is rajasic. So alcohol is also rajasic depending on the dose, and overdosing with alcohol makes it also tamasic. So this is a very relating concept. Even depending on the dosage, the effect of food on the mind will change. So the same substance can be sattvic, rajasic and tamasic depending on how you use it. So fried items are generally considered to be rajasic. But if you overeat them, they can also have a tamasic effect on the system because they don't get easily digested, and then they produce a lot of ama in the system, and then it can also have a tamasic effect on your mind. So is this clear? So even spices in small quantities are sattvic. So spices in small quantities can be stimulating. A little stimulation is good for the mind. The only problem is when you overstimulate. So we have to consider all these things. Like if you completely avoid spices, then it can affect your digestion. You may not be able to fully digest the food. So spices are known to be able to prevent, deposit of harmful substances in your body, which can later lead to cancer and such other harmful diseases. So usage of a little spices may be necessary for your digestion and also for proper absorption and assimilation of the food. So these concepts we have to understand very carefully. So it's only when they are used in large quantities and very frequently that they create problems. So is this point clear? So generally we can see that overuse of stimulants makes the food rajasic. But people who are having a tamasic constitution, they will benefit by using rajasic food. But people who have a rajasic constitution, they should avoid using rajasic food. So the use of these foods are also not very categorical. It depends on what type of mental constitution you have. And people who are extremely sattva can also benefit by using a little rajasic food. Otherwise, they tend to become extremely withdrawn and not at all very active in life. So all these foods are to be used, with discretion. So then we come to tamasic food. So tamasic food, these are the stale, contaminated, foul-smelling foods. But also, I can tell straight away, one of the biggest problem in modern food habits is stored food. We use a lot of stored pre-cooked food. So not pre-cooked food. And then also recooked food, both recooked and pre-cooked. That you heat a food again after it's half processed and it's stored for a long time. So the prana or life energy is withdrawn from that food. When you eat food fresh, there's something which modern nutritionists are not able to find out, is which Ayurveda calls as a life force. When you pick fresh vegetables and immediately cook and eat, then there is a life force which also gets transmitted. When you store that food for a long period of time, when you refrigerate it, this life force or energy is lost. So people who eat that kind of stored food a long period of time, they tend to have a very low life force. Their mind becomes very easily depressed. So people who eat canned food and people who continuously take food from the refrigerator, they can very easily get depressed. Their minds can have become very on low energy, and maybe you have all experienced this. So even use of preservatives can be harmful. Yes. But some preservatives are recommended. One example is drying. Fruits can be stored by drying. So there are dry fruits which are not considered as harmful in Ayurveda. And you can also use salt and sugar to preserve. So some foods are acceptable when they are preserved with salt or sugar. Certain exceptions are rice grains are considered to be better when they are stored. So these are some of the exceptions. Similarly, tamarind is best taken after storage. So we say rice that is stored for 1 year is better than rice that is freshly harvested. Because freshly harvested rice and fresh tamarind can stimulate too much of secretions in your system and they can clog the channels. So you can see that Ayurveda looks at so many factors, and considering all these things are very essential to bring a balanced diet. So with this we are coming to the conclusion of our first session in today's webinar. So let us have a break for about 10 minutes. Hello, can you hear? Okay, can everyone hear? Okay, so we will get started and we will continue. So somebody asked me about tamarind, but I think he's perhaps not available now. But anyway, this is the picture of tamarind. This is very sour. It is a digestive stimulant. So have you seen this? So this is the fruit that I was talking about. Yes. So we then go to the previous presentation. So just open this slide. So there are just a few more supplementary slides for our previous discussion before we go on to the next presentation. So food is, there's a difference in Ayurveda. There are some definitions which we need to review before we go on with our discussion. That food is defined as something which has to be tasty, because food is something which not only nourishes the body but also the mind. So food is not something which we can take as medicine. It has to be pleasant to all our sense organs. It should be palatable And if it is not palatable, it will not get properly digested. And the purpose of food is to maintain the body elements. The body will control how the food is going to get transformed. So body works on the food much more than the food works on the body. The body decides what should happen to the food that we take. So this is how Ayurveda defines food. And then we have medicine. Medicine is usually, it's very difficult to get a good tasting medicine. We need to add so many things, so many additives to make the medicine palatable. So medicines actually cause fluctuations of body elements. The body acts on the medicine and the medicine also acts on the body. The medicine does a lot more on the body than the food does to it. The food is mainly nourishing, whereas medicine is regulating. Now poison is something where the taste is not significant. Some poisons may be palatable, some may not be palatable. But they cause severe fluctuations and deviations of the body elements to the point of toxicity or death, and the substance controls the body. So in Ayurveda, different types of foods have been prescribed. We will come to a more detailed discussion very shortly. So according to Ayurveda, there is food medicine, and there is medicine food, and then there is medicine poison, poison medicine, and poison. So this is a very broad classification which covers the entire spectrum of substances in the universe, starting from food on one point and poison on the other. So when we consider food, there are three types of food that we have to be wary of. So there are things that are purely food, very nourishing. There are foods that are nourishing and also regulatory. And there are medicines which also serve the function of food. So it's important to keep this classification in mind when we decide what to eat. Is this point clear? Is this classification clear? So I wanted to just point about three important divisions which we will again come back to. Food medicine, and medicine food. This is a unique classification in Ayurveda. So something which has only nutritional properties is called as food. Something which has got also regulatory properties apart from nutrition is called food medicine. And medicines which can also function or give nourishment are called as medicine foods. So this classification, please keep in mind, and I hope this is clear. So another important concept in Ayurveda is that people adopt different lifestyles. I would appreciate getting some feedback whether these concepts are clear so that I can move forward. So I hope the classification of food into food medicine, and medicine food is clear. The next important classification is about lifestyle. So people follow three different types of lifestyles according to Ayurveda. There are some people who are completely under the control of the senses. They are people who eat more by instinct than by choice or awareness. So in Sanskrit, these people are called as laukikas. So I'm just mentioning the Sanskrit name. I avoided it in the slide to prevent any confusion or difficulty in understanding. But we must know that there are certain people who are choosing a lifestyle which are more defined by the impulsiveness. So in another words, we can say there are people who they are impulsive. They choose diet based on their impulsions. So these are the first group of people. It is very difficult to impose too much of control on such individuals. They tend to get a lot of problems due to bad diet, and the Ayurvedic approach for such people is compensatory. So we advise a compensatory regimen because these are the people who do not have full control over themselves. So you have to advise additional procedures and behavioral suggestions on the basis of which they can counteract some of the negative effects of the diet that they are taking. The second group of people are called as Vaidikas. They are the ones who are trying to move from impulse to informed decision. They are partly under the control of their impulses and partly they are controlling their own impulses. So these group of people, you are able to advise some modified regimens. We can modify their lifestyle to some extent. The first group, lifestyle modification is different. You can only give compensatory guidelines. Second group, we can modify partial modification. The third group are the ones who are very much self-aware, who are in control of their own sense organs. And for these people, it is possible to actually completely modify their lifestyle. So we can give them full regimen. We can completely modify their lifestyle. These are the people who are very compliant and who are able to shift to completely healthy lifestyles. So is this point clear? This is a very practical, important tip. It's not possible to change the lifestyle of all the people, all of a sudden. So Ayurveda offers 3 approaches to bringing lifestyle changes. To those people who are very impulsive, we advise a compensatory lifestyle. To those people who are attempting to change their lifestyle, we advise partial lifestyle modification. To those people who are regulating, completely in control of themselves, Ayurveda advises a complete lifestyle change. Is this point clear? Do you agree that the clients that we meet in our life, in our work, could fall under any of these 3 categories? It's not possible to impose the same strict regimen on everyone. Is this point clear? Okay, thank you. So then we move on. So when we want to change, when we try to bring the Ayurvedic dietary practices, we try to apply it, this is the practical reality. We will find that there are 3 different types of people. We cannot all change them overnight. A lot of people are taking unwholesome foods. How do we change them? So Ayurveda says that we have to classify. See, some people are already taking wholesome food and they are used to it. This is the ideal situation. You don't have to do anything. This is very good. But some people are used to that type of food. And this is not a good situation, but we cannot change them overnight. Some people are unaccustomed to unwholesome diet and we don't need to force them, encourage them. This is hardly the situation. This is a theoretical possibility that there are some people who are not used to bad dietary habits, which is very unusual. And then there are people who are not accustomed to wholesome diet, and we have to actually train them to change over to a wholesome food. So the transition from a bad dietary regimen to a more healthy dietary regimen has to be done in steps. So you have to first start with compensation, then you have to start with partial change, and then you have to do a complete change. So it has to be done in phases. So this is a very important practical advice that Ayurveda gives, and in fact there are a lot of procedures that have been described, and Ayurveda also defines what it means by completely wholesome food. Wholesome food is able to achieve all these goals at the same time. There are some foods which are nourishing, some foods which give energy, some foods which get completely transformed, some which gives balanced nutrition to the tissues, some foods can give non-disturbance to the doshas, some foods are easily digested and eliminated, but it's very difficult to get foods which do all of these things at the same time. So the concept of balanced diet in Ayurveda is to achieve all of these goals at the same time. So a balanced diet is something which nourishes, also gives energy, which gets completely transformed, which balancefully nourishes the tissues, which doesn't disturb the doshas, and which are easily digested and the wastes are separated and eliminated. When all of these goals are achieved, then we call that diet as completely balanced. So, the 6 tastes in food. Usually substances which are tasting sweet, they serve 2 purposes. They either give nourishment for the structures, or they provide energy. So nourishment, structural and functional nourishment. This is the function of the sweet taste. Now the sour, saline and pungent tastes help in transformation. So these tastes enable the food to get completely transformed. And bitter and astringent tastes are balancing and correcting. So the food that we take should actually be a balance of all these tastes. So the sweet tastes usually are substances which are carbohydrates, fats and proteins, and sour, saline and pungent tastes are the food additives. These are the spices without the help of which the food cannot get completely transformed. And the bitter and astringent tastes balance and correct the transformation of the food and ensure that they are properly digested and eliminated from the body. So this is how the tastes are applied in dietetics. So this is a very important principle in Ayurveda, that when it comes to Ayurvedic dietetics, what goes inside is not really that important as to what happens to the food once it is consumed. The transformation of the food is more important than just filling up your body with all kind of nutrients. We need to ensure that the food that we take is completely transformed. So, food, this is the Ayurvedic concept of a balanced diet. So what is a diet? Is choosing a food that gets completely transformed. So the power to transform food varies from individual to individual. So only the food that is completely transformed is balanced food. So we look at a few more points that we say that human beings are capable of these expressions. On the one hand, we are capable of experiencing that sense of comfort, that sense of bliss, or that sense of happiness. Unless we are able to find at least few moments of this inner happiness in our day-to-day lives, we will get depressed and we will get stressed. So it's very important that you, one part of your being is always trying to get established in that state of inner bliss or balance. The second thing is that you are taking decisions. You are able to perceive things with clarity and take decisions. This, in fact, comes from our ability to perceive the nature of things. And based on these three states of your mind, you are able to interact with the external environment. You are able to sense the external environment and interact with it. So this is achieved through the self, the mind, the intellect, and the sense organs. So the human being is a combination of the self. Without the self, we cannot feel happy. Without the mind, we cannot perceive things. Without the intellect, we cannot take decisions. And without the sense organs, we cannot interact with the external world. So what Ayurveda says is that this quality of human life, the quality of human life depends on the quality of these five elements. We must be able to find that sense of inner balance and bliss. Only when you are established in that state is your cognition balanced, is your decision making balanced, and only then you are able to interact with the external environment in a balanced way. And food influences all these five factors very profoundly. So we say that when the food is pure, the mind is pure, and when the mind is pure, there is uninterrupted awareness, and with awareness comes bliss. So this is what we discussed just before we were concluding the previous session, how different types of food affect your mind, and how when the food affects the mind, your entire personality completely changes. So we say that food creates personalities. Depending on the food that you eat, you can create specific types of personalities. So I think at this point we need to go to the new slide. Yes. So this is our topic for the second discussion, how Ayurveda classifies food in different ways. And now we will specifically look at nutraceuticals and food supplements, which are also becoming so popular today. Ayurveda has very strong ideas about nutraceuticals and food supplements, so we will look at some important concepts. So we know that food is a substance. In modern terms, it's defined as something which is made of carbohydrates. Oh, I'm sorry, there's some problem with these slides. So this is the correct slide. So we need to distinguish. There are certain technical terms which are even used today and also in Ayurveda, that we distinguish between food, we distinguish diet, dietary supplements, nutraceuticals, and functional foods. So Ayurveda also has very specific ideas in what is food, what is diet, what are dietary supplements, what is nutraceutical, and what is functional food. So we will try to define the Ayurvedic approach to understanding food and nutrition. So food, let us look at food first. Food is a substance which usually is composed of carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and water, and this is eaten or drunk by an animal. It's used for both nutrition and pleasure. This is also acknowledged in Ayurveda, because Ayurveda says that when you consider food, not only nutrition, but also taste, palatability, food is something which when we eat, we should also feel that pleasure. So this is the way food is defined. But when we come to diet, diet is the deliberate selection of food to control body weight or nutrient intake. So diet food is something which helps to regulate. It's not just for nutrition or for pleasure. It's basically to control and regulate your body physiology. So in Ayurveda, food is called as ahara and diet is called as pathya. So there are different terms to distinguish these two types of, food patterns. And then we have, sorry, this slide seems to get repeated. Be some problem in moving the slides. There is some problem in moving the slides. Okay, diet, and then we have dietary supplements. Are you all able to see the slides? Okay. So a dietary supplement is different from both food and diet. It is a nutritional food supplement. It's very specifically intended to provide the body with specific nutrients. So in Ayurveda also, which are missing in the body, and you will need to add it specifically to specific individuals' diets. So this is a very tricky definition because regulatory wise, some countries consider dietary supplements as foods, while some other countries consider them as drugs. So this is why I told in Ayurveda we have classifications as food, food medicine, and medicine food. So dietary supplements in Ayurveda comes under the food medicine category. They are not, whereas the first one, food and diet, they are considered as food. The second one is medicine food, and then we will go to food medicine. We then have functional foods. So a functional food is something which is very similar to what we normally eat. It might even be mistaken for normal food, but it is something which is demonstrated to have very specific effect in treating or in preventing a particular disease, which means foods which have some bioactive compounds. Many of the vegetables or spices that we use are sometimes considered to be functional foods because they are known to have specific impact in specific diseases. So this is the definition of a functional food. So this is again coming into the Ayurvedic classification of a medicine food or a food medicine. And then we have nutraceuticals. So nutraceuticals are substances which are isolated or purified from foods, and these are sold in medicinal forms. They are not normally considered as foods. They are really coming in between the junction of foods and medicine. So a nutraceutical should be demonstrated to have a physiological benefit or provide protection against chronic disease. So they are used as supplements. So this is the whole spectrum that we are going to look at and how Ayurveda defines, especially when it comes to treatments, and especially because today world over, most of the Ayurvedic treatments are being reduced to nutraceuticals or food supplements or dietary supplements. They are not recognized as medicines. So I wanted to highlight that when we talk about food, we also need to study and understand how Ayurveda looks at these food supplements, because all Ayurvedic medicines are not food supplements. Ayurvedic medicines are a separate category, which we will discuss in our future webinars. But Ayurveda does have a lot of substances which can be considered as food supplements or nutraceuticals or functional foods. Is this point clear? Any doubts? Can we move forward? So now we look at nutraceuticals and dietary supplements. So the difference is nutraceuticals must not only supplement the diet. Dietary supplements are just supplements. They just provide additional nutrients. Whereas nutraceuticals but should also aid in the prevention and or treatment of a particular disease or disorder. So this is the difference between a dietary supplement and a nutraceutical. So now we have to look at the difference. Like, there are two kinds of health claims that are made about foods other than dietary supplements. These are called as structure, function, and disease claims. So structure function claims do not suggest that the food can diagnose, treat, or prevent any particular disease, but that it can maintain, regulate, or promote normal bodily functions. When such claims are made, foods are generally required to carry a disclaimer on their label indicating that the foods has not been. So this is regulatory. We are also discussing at food safety. What I wanted to point out is that these points are also discussed in the classical Ayurvedic texts. They distinguish between structure function claims and also disease claims. So disease claims are when we say that foods can prevent specific diseases. So in today's world, you need regulatory clearance to be able to make any disease claims. There has to be a lot of scientific studies which give evidence that that food has effect on a particular disease. So dietary supplements do not need a regulation with FDA, and only the safety studies are needed. So many Ayurvedic products are today pushed as dietary supplements. So I wanted to discuss this to show that Ayurvedic medicines cannot be reduced to dietary supplements, because the Ayurvedic medicines are having claims on disease. They are used for specific diseases. So dietary supplement manufacturers only the safety is monitored. They are not. We will not discuss too much on these points, but I took up this topic for discussion only to point out how in Ayurveda medicine and food are very clearly distinguished. So while dietary supplements need to be standardized, they need to be tested for safety, they don't need to be tested for efficacy. Some slides are getting repeated. Okay, so this is the next slide. So when Ayurveda gives treatment, it comprises of three things, that is medicine, diet, and behavior. So the regulation of food for disease management is the cornerstone of Ayurvedic therapy. So when Ayurveda talks about food and diet, it also talks about its medicinal properties. Although I want to emphasize again that medicine is another component. We can never say that Ayurvedic medicines are just, glorified diets. Ayurvedic medicines are not glorified diets. Diet is a separate component. And diet is distinguished from food. So diet by itself has medicinal properties, apart from the medicine. And so we will find a lot of discussion in Ayurveda, how to evaluate the medicinal properties of food, which we will discuss in a little bit more detail today. So substances are broadly classified into food, medicine, and poison. And so today we have only food and drug classification. The medicine category in Ayurveda is not the same as drug in modern healthcare. So this is a point I want to make. If you look at the Ayurvedic classification, we must have not FDA, but food, medicine, drug classification. So we will actually have FMDA and not FDA. Because in modern medicine, what you mean by drug is poison. So in modern medicine, there is only food and drug. Whereas in Ayurveda, there is food, medicine, and drug. So drug means use of poison as medicine. So when food is used as medicine, it is still food. When poison is used as medicine, it is drug. When something is used exclusively as medicine, it's a new category, and that is medicine. This is not there in FDA. Is this point clear? Did you get this point? Hello, are you able to hear? Is what I discussed clear? Okay, so in Ayurveda, foods are, so we have the classification food into 5 categories. Food, which includes nutrition and dietetics. Food medicine, which includes nutraceuticals and functional foods. And then we have medicine, medicine, poison, and then poison. So this is the 5-fold broad classification. So when we say food, we are looking at how nutrition can be regulated, both for preservation of health as well as for management of diseases. And when we say diet, it means regulated food. And when we say functional food, it is food for specific medicinal use. And when we say nutraceuticals, it is a very specialized type of food which is preventive and curative. And these are actually use of food extracts. So it's interesting to find that in Ayurveda, all these categories of foods have been described in a lot of examples, which we will try to explain in our discussion today. So as we said, food, just a quick overview. Food means nourishment, nutrition, and pleasure. Diet and treatment means regulated intake of food, less importance to pleasure, more importance to complete transformation. Ayurveda has recognized the rich spectrum of substances that come between food and medicine. So using food as medicine and extracting medicine from food. So here are some of the functional foods that Ayurveda talks about: grapes, pomegranate, gooseberry, garlic, ashgot, milk and garlic. These are all defined. Ayurveda gives elaborate guidelines on how to use these as functional foods. And then there are some nutraceuticals. I'm sorry, there's some Sanskrit here. The nutraceuticals are specific formulations which are derived from food substances, but they are formulations. So pomegranate, as you can see from the picture, there are some specific nutraceutical foods in Ayurveda which are called as uh, formulations, but which can be considered as nutraceuticals. There are some based on ash god. There is a specific rasayana which is made out of ash god, and this is a nutraceutical. And there are certain specific medicines made out of grapes, which again can be considered as a nutraceutical. So many formulations in Ayurveda can be considered as nutraceuticals or functional foods. And it's important to distinguish between what is purely medicine and what is a nutraceutical. So a nutraceutical is neither food nor drug. And so this is the point. If the moment you make drug claims, then it becomes a medicine. So when we consider using Ayurvedic substances as nutraceuticals, we need to look at their specific ingredients, contaminants, pesticide residue, biological hazards, labeling, and other things. So this is a very busy slide, and we will not discuss much about this, but I want to talk that as we move from food to nutraceuticals, this is the shadow area in which Ayurveda is struggling, that when we come to nutraceuticals, there are more regulatory requirements. So I skip a few slides. So now we come to how Ayurveda gives you some guidelines on creating foods that can be used in specific diseases. So generally, Ayurveda classifies foods into these categories: cereals, pulses, milk products, fruits, and vegetables. So if you make a parallel, cereals are actually equivalent to what we call today as carbohydrates. Pulses are what we look today as natural sources of proteins. And then we have milk products, which are a combination of proteins and fats. And then we have fruits and vegetables, which actually provide us with the nutritional supplements like vitamins. So there are many types of foods that are prepared from cereals, and all of them have different properties. We have, for example, rice cooked in water. You can cook this in a very watery form, which is called as manda. We can cook in semi-liquid form. We can cook it in a paste-like form. We can also have rice with all the watery element strained off. Then we can have pulverized rice. We can have puffed rice, and then we can also have flattened rice. So rice can be cooked in and processed in all these different ways, and each of them have different properties. So maybe I should ask here, how many of you have, do you use rice in all these forms? Okay, that's great to know. So I think in Japan there's more use of rice than maybe in other parts of Europe. So Ayurveda gives you guidelines on the difference of the properties of all these different substances. So I would like to just maybe take a moment to refresh, because there's some problem from my side in moving the slides. The slide seems to be jumping, so I'll just take a moment and refresh and come back. Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Okay. So now I'm talking about different types of cooking rice. So one of the methods to eat rice in Ayurveda is strained rice water, which means that water is boiled with water. It's cooked in 14 times the quantity of water, and only the supernatant liquid portion of the rice is removed. The rice itself is not taken. And this supernatant portion is served with dry ginger and salt. This is said to be extremely stimulant for digestion. It's a very strong digestive stimulant. And this is very good in diarrhea. It's very good in dehydration. And it's very good energy drink. So adding a little ginger, dry ginger and salt, and it's especially good for people with weak digestion. So this is called the strained rice water. And then there are variants. This is actually called as manda in Sanskrit. So this can be cooked with coriander, 3 pungents. The 3 pungents are actually ginger, pepper, and long pepper. I hope all are familiar with these 3 spices. You can add coriander or 3 pungents or a little bit of rock salt or green gram and fried asafoetida. And also you can add a little bit of the rice grains to make it not fully liquid but with a little rice. So these are variants. So if your system has more of pitta, then we use coriander. You can add coriander to the rice water when there is pitta. If you have more of kapha, then you can add the 3 pungents. And if you have more of vata, then you can add rock salt or you can add asafoetida. Are all these substances available in your place? So you can add different substances depending on the dosha that you want to target. And this type of manda is extremely digestive. It is vitalizing. It is hematinic. It improves the quality of the blood. It pacifies fever, and it also stabilizes the doshas. So even barley can be used. So you can use, instead of rice, you can use barley and again boil it in 14 times the quantity of water. And once the grains are fully cooked, then you can strain the supernatant liquid. And this is very good for reducing kapha. It's very good to clear the throat. And it also is very soothing for the rakta or blood in your system. So there's another variant, is that the rice, you can use parched rice, which means the rice which is puffed. Do you use puffed rice? Are you aware of puffed rice? It's like popcorn. You can almost call it as a rice popcorn. The rice becomes floury, very light. I hope you're familiar with this. You can cook that puffed rice also by adding 14 times of water. And this is extremely good in tiredness. If the person is able to drink water, it's very good in vomiting. If you give this liquid after boiling in puffed rice, it can very quickly prevent vomiting and also give rehydration for people who vomit. So it can be administered with pepper, long pepper, salt, or even ginger. And sometimes in my experience, even you can add a little lemon, and this is very soothing for the digestive tract. So this is a very interesting aspect, that the way we use the rice grains, the way we add other ingredients, its efficacy changes. Now, rice gruel is another form of eating rice. So these are all considered as diet in Ayurveda because these are used for medicinal purposes. There's only a small deviation from our normal food from what we call as a diet. So when rice is cooked in 14 times the quantity of water, both the rice particles and water portion are served. So this is called as thin rice gruel. It is easy to digest, it hardens the stools and provides immediate nourishment to the tissues. So when the digestion is a little bit stronger, then you can use the rice gruel. So what is important? Why I'm mentioning this? This is a procedure in Panchakarma. Diet in Panchakarma, when you have done a cleansing of the body, bringing the person back to normal diet. Suppose you have had a very severe disease and your digestion is very much affected. Then, to kindle your digestive fire, this is the sequence that is used. You start with strained rice water, is the starting. Then you move to thin rice gruel. Then you take thick rice gruel. And then you gradually take fully cooked rice. So this sequence, if you take rice in this sequence, then it does a lot of things. It balances your digestion, it rehydrates your body, it optimizes nutrition, and then it steadily stabilizes your digestive fire. So this procedure is very important in enabling the digestive system to recover. So this method is called as rehabilitation of the digestive system. So if you want to rehabilitate a person's digestive system, you can give a purgative. You can make the person purge with some medicines and then start with strained rice water and slowly bring him back to a normal diet. And you can find that after this process, the bioavailability, the digestive ability, and the strength of the digestive fire would have become extremely, stabilized. So are you aware of this method of sequencing these rice preparations for digestive rehabilitation? Is this clear? Has anybody practiced this? So here is another variant of the rice gruel. When rice is cooked in 6 times the quantity of water, and when there is less part of liquid and more rice particles, then it is called a thick rice gruel. So what is important to understand is the difference between all these: the strained rice water, the thin rice gruel, the thick rice gruel, and the fully cooked rice, the proportions, and in which condition you can actually apply them. All these are very important to enable the digestive system to be stabilized. So the clinical application of these preparations are that in Ayurveda, to strengthen digestive fire after a disease, after purification, this is the method that is used to again strengthen your digestive system. So we have pasty rice gruel. So these are the different proportions. You can use 14 times water. When you use 14 times water, you get strained rice water, or you get thin rice gruel. But when we use 6 times water, we get thick rice gruel. And when we use 4 times the water, we get pasty rice gruel. So 14 times water, 6 times water, and 4 times water. These are the different ways in which we can use the proportion. So this is nourishing, this is tissue building, palatable, and pacifies pitta. So this pasty rice gruel can be used with spices and also salts. And next is cooked rice. Cooked rice, it's in 14 times the water, and the entire supernatant liquid is strained. So cooked rice is sweet and light, but it has a very high glycemic index. So it is not recommended in conditions like diabetes. You have to use it with a lot of vegetables. So this is about the different ways of cooking. I'm sorry for that disturbance. So is this clear? We just discussed about cooking of rice in different ways. So am I audible? So one important point is that depending on the type of rice, because rice itself comes in so many varieties, so the proportion of water that needs to be added varies. You can add 4 times or 5 times or 10 times or 14 times. So this is decided depending on the type of rice that you are actually using. So there are some rices which are very pasty, some rices which are very thin and do not swell, with some rices which are very hard. They need more water for cooking. So depending on the type of rice, we have to change the proportions. So to summarize, these are the general proportions that are used. When you want the rice strained water, it is 14 times. When you want the thin rice gruel, it is 14 times. When you want the thick rice gruel, it is 6 times. And when you want the pasty rice gruel, it is 4 times. And when you want fully cooked dry rice, then it is 4 times. Does this practice, is this proportion being used in your country? What proportion of water do you use? Okay, so that is recommended for thick rice paste and for normal cooked rice. So if you want to make rice gruel, then you need to actually add more water. So processing of rice, Ayurveda says why? So to reduce the sliminess of the, okay. So Ayurveda says that when your digestive fire is very weak, then you need to add 14 times water. So it is between 14 and 4 times. This is the limit prescribed. So with this you can make adjustments in between. So the purpose of processing rice, when you wash rice, it reduces its sliminess. And when you boil rice, it increases digestibility. And straining cooked rice makes it dry and so easier to mix with other vegetables and other food substances. And frying rice before cooking makes it light and reduces kapha. But frying using too much of oil for frying is not recommended. So there's a distinction between using oil should be used at the end of the frying process, that oil itself should not be cooked much. So this is the Ayurvedic idea about processing of rice. Now there are other rice preparations. One is rice flour, which is pulverized rice, and then parched rice, and then flattened rice. Out of this rice flour is actually mixed with water. So these three substances, out of these three substances, the parched rice or the puffed rice has more medicinal properties. The rice flour as well as flattened rice are used for food substances. They are generally very heavy and they are not recommended for very long-term use. So we discussed about rice and its different preparations and its processings and how these change in either the preparation or the processing can have different impact on not only its calorie value but also its medicinal properties. Now it's very important in Ayurveda that to balance diet, Ayurveda always recommends a combination of cereals and pulses. So there are specific types of foods which are prepared by combining rices and cereals in specific ratios. So it is either 1:1/2 or 1:1/4 ratio. So when we combine rice and cereals, rice is taken more. So for one part of rice, half or 1/4 part of cereals are taken. And along with it, we add oil, rock salt, ginger, asafoetida, and turmeric. And this is cooked in 6 times the quantity of water to obtain solid consistency. So this increases kapha, pitta, it increases strength and also reduces vata. So these are what we are discussing now are the diets that are prescribed while we treat patients. So a patient has to be slowly brought back to a heavy diet. And these are all phases in which different types of foods are given. So when the digestive fire is having moderate strength, then we use these kind of combinations of rice and cereals. So in the first phase, it is only rice. In the second phase, cereals and pulses are combined. So it's very well known that combining a cereal with a pulse balances your amino acids. So the pulse protein is low in certain types of amino acids, but it is rich in other types of amino acids. For example, pulse protein is very rich in the amino acid called lysine. And pulses also are a good source of the vitamin B group, except riboflavin. And the loss of these nutrients when you process pulses is much less. Cereals lose much of the supplements when you process them. So cereals are devoid of vitamin C and which are seen in sprouted pulses. So cereals and pulses actually balance our amino acid requirement. What is missing in one is provided by the other. So in pulses, the next we come to pulses. So pulses, we have to be very careful. Pulses can cause digestive discomfort. It can also overload the urinary system. So pulses can be consumed only when your digestive system has been fine-tuned to a certain extent. That is why in Ayurveda, pulses are given in the second phase. So we start with rice, then we mix rice and pulses, and then we go on to completely a pulse-based diet. So there are 2 types of preparations. One is called as Yusha. It's a type of pulse preparation. One part of pulse is boiled in 16 or 18 times the quantity of water along with dry pepper and dry ginger. So in Ayurveda you can understand that all the food preparations are fine-tuned by considering the strength of the digestive fire and the ability to absorb. So boiling in water is to enable the bioavailability of the food article, and enhancing the digestion. We add these spices, long pepper and dry ginger, and this semi-solid preparation is given in the next phase when the digestion has improved to a certain extent. So after carbohydrates, after the energy has been provided, now more structural components are given to the body. And supa is actually a Sanskrit word which is very similar to soup. So the English word soup seems to have originated from the word supa in Sanskrit. And when you make supa, you have to dehusk the pulses, then it is fried and cooked in water, and oil and spices are added. So this is the soup. So usually today we start a food, the first course of the meal today is a soup. So Ayurveda says that these soups are already heavy, they are not light. So we need to even start with strained rice water, is the more simpler kind of liquid with which you can start your food. So you can see some of these food Ayurvedic dietary practices are used in modern eating also. The practice of starting your course meal with a soup has its origin in Ayurveda. Now, types of yusha, these kind of soups can be either processed or unprocessed. So you can give it without adding spices or oil, and it is a digestive, laxative, appetizer. It removes the phlegm from the throat, and it's good as the beginning course of the meal. You can either give it processed or unprocessed. Then there are other specific diets which are advised in Ayurveda to strengthen the digestive fire, and these are from milk products. A very important dietary supplement for stabilizing digestive fire is buttermilk. So I would like to ask whether uh, those of you who are now participating in the webinar, are you using buttermilk? It's my understanding that in the West, yogurt is used more than buttermilk. So Ayurveda says that if you want to stabilize your digestive system, so what we are seeing here, all these preparations in Ayurveda are aimed not at just nourishment, but to keep your digestive system in optimal state of functioning. So for that, these preparations are very important. And for that, buttermilk is more important than yogurt. So I would like to know whether this practice of using buttermilk is prevalent. And there are different types of buttermilk mentioned in Ayurveda, which we will shortly discuss. So some of the incipient form, buttermilk is used as buttermilk liquid, also in its incipient form. Both yogurt and buttermilk are solidified and taken. That's one way in which to use. They can be used as liquid, or you can add curd or buttermilk with fruits. And so in India we have a very interesting preparation called lassi, which is a modification of the buttermilk. So I was just waiting to hear from you whether buttermilk is used. Yeah, all fermented foods are not yes, it's a good question. All types of fermented foods are not prohibited in Ayurveda. In fact, certain types of fermentation are considered to be good to enhance digestion. So only thing is it shouldn't go to the level of generating alcohol. So if the fermentation produces too much of alcohol, There must be a reason. So fermentation enables, facilitates, it kickstarts digestion and enables good absorption. The only problem is that it can aggravate pitta and also actually pollute the blood. So we have to be a bit careful when we use too much of, fermented food. Maybe there is some reason why a lot of fermented food is used in Japan. Maybe you could think about that. Okay, so we continue. So these are different preparations from milk products. So there are different types of buttermilk. Different types of buttermilk have different properties. So Ayurveda says that buttermilk, to be really effective, many people dilute yogurt to make buttermilk. But this is not acceptable in Ayurveda. Ayurveda says that it is not enough to just dilute yogurt, you have to churn. So in fact, a directly fermented product like yogurt is not considered good. That is why buttermilk is churned yogurt. You have to churn it and remove the fat. So depending on the proportion of water that we use, the type of processing that you do, there are different types of buttermilks. So you can use half part of water, 1/4 water. You can churn it with a stick. You can use 2 parts of water. You can even make buttermilk with your hands, hand churned, churning without water, churned no water and no butter, equal amount of water, and you can also add fruit juice. So all these properties will make buttermilk different. But what Ayurveda recommends as diet recommended buttermilk is that which is churned after separating the fat. So I am discussing these things because these are the diets that are very important when we come to treatments. That is the rice preparations, the uh, the pulse preparations, and the buttermilk preparations. These three we will understand in future when we go to treatment of individual diseases. These are very, very important in deciding a balanced diet, especially in stabilizing digestive fire. So there are 3 types of buttermilk mentioned by Charaka. One is these, I'm sorry for the Sanskrit terms. The first one is dry buttermilk without any fat. This is very good to remove kapha. So if a person has too much of kapha in the system, you must use dry buttermilk, which means remove all the fat. So this is a principle on how to modify food substances depending on the doshas. So if you have a person who has more pitta in the system, remove half of the fat from buttermilk. And then you have a buttermilk which is good for pitta. And when you don't remove the fat from the buttermilk, when you keep the fat and dilute it with water, then it is good for pitta vata. So you can see how Ayurveda adjusts or modifies food substances based on the doshas. So the same buttermilk, depending on how we process it, can have a different action on different doshas. So buttermilk, general properties, it is astringent, sour and sweet, and you must take buttermilk before it becomes too sour. Sour buttermilk can cause acidity. It hardens the stools. It's a very good treatment for diarrhea. In fact, a quick remedy for a home remedy for stopping diarrhea is mix a little turmeric with buttermilk and heat it and consume. This can stop diarrhea very quickly. It's a very popular home remedy in India. So it hardens the stools, it is light, dry, increases digestive fire. It's very good in indigestion. It's very good in flatulence. It's a very good remedy for food poisoning. Mild cases of food poisoning can be easily treated with buttermilk and turmeric. So this is also used as a compensatory food. Even people for alcoholism, if you take too much of alcohol and you have the symptoms of excess consumption of alcohol, then using buttermilk is a counter remedy. So these are various ways in which buttermilk is used as a dietary ingredient. So now I'm going to talk about, before we conclude today, about 2 or 3 specific types of drinks that are made. These are medicated drinks. We have to use 1 part of buttermilk, 1/16th part of pulses, cumin seeds and pepper. It is boiled with water, reduced to 1/4. And a few spices are also added. And this drink is called as kada. It is a very spicy buttermilk. There is another type of drink which is used with 1 part of sour curds, 1/8 part of pulses, spices and lemon juice is added. That is called as kambaliga. So these are 2 additional drinks which are given after the patient's digestive fire has increased and is beginning to take solid foods. Then these additional drinks are given as supplements. So both these 2 types of buttermilk drinks are digestive stimulants, promotes metabolism, increases appetite, hardens stools, and reduces kapha and vata. So I think with this we will conclude today's seminar. There are a few more slides which we would consider in the next class. But I want to just get some feedback before we conclude today. And just summarizing, we discussed today about the principles of a balanced diet. We looked at the 8 factors with the help of which we decide what food is good for us. And we described 4 patterns of eating, how we develop a balanced habit of eating food, samashanam, in which we have to avoid taking frequent meals and taking meals in wrong times and taking meals in wrong proportions. And then we looked at 18 types of incompatibility, how even a well-balanced diet can go wrong if it is in contradiction with those 18 factors, which include time, place, processing, and so many other factors. And then we looked at food and medicine, the boundaries which distinguish between what is purely food and what is both food and medicine at the same time. And then we came to the most important dietary components in Ayurveda, which we use in all diseases. These are preparations made out of rice, out of pulses. And I want to point out at this time, the most popularly used pulse in medicine in Ayurveda is green gram. I do not know whether green gram is available. And you know, red rice is recommended in Ayurveda for dietary applications and green gram for pulses. And then the third important thing is buttermilk. So I discussed today how rice is cooked in different ways and how a digestive rehabilitation procedure is described in Ayurveda, starting from rice cooked in different ways to pulses cooked in different ways, and then coming to buttermilk and its applications. With these 3 dietary preparations, Ayurveda stabilizes the digestive system. This is done as a rehabilitation after severe illnesses or also after a full course of Panchakarma. So in the next class, we will discuss about dietary articles, specific diets. We look at examples of how using these principles that we discussed today, we can learn how in modern world, using modern dietary articles, how we can develop a balanced diet for healthy individual and how we can prescribe diet for management of specific diseases. So this is what we discussed today. I hope this was clear. So with this, we would like to conclude. I would like to conclude today's webinar.